Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Tokyo Pink Room Lady by Atypical Dragon. Context. This is a real story of probably the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I was serving a Mormon mission at the time in Tokyo, Japan. If it weren't for the fact that I experienced it with another person, I'd probably just think I hallucinated the whole thing. I'm not a super big believer in the paranormal, and I don't think that's what happened here either. But I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one. Story time. This took place about 10 years ago while I was doing some missionary work in Tokyo, Japan. I was a Mormon at the time, and as is custom in the Mormon church, when I turned 18 I submitted my mission papers and was called to Tokyo. Mormon missions are 2-year ordeals where you are assigned to a random location in the world, told to learn the language they speak in that area, and tell everyone you meet about Jesus. While I no longer hold to the Mormon faith, I'll always be grateful for the adventure that was my 2 years in Japan. While you're on a mission for the church, you follow a strict regiment and are assigned a companion that is to be your proselytizing peer during the course of your time in the field. While in the field, you are assigned to different areas as the mission president sees fit. At the time of this story, I was assigned to the Kichioi area near central Tokyo. It was early fall, and the leaves had just begun to change color. My companion and I had hit the streets hard ever since I had transferred into the town, and it's a beautiful district in Tokyo, and I believe has won multiple awards for the most desired place to live in Japan. It's a maze of alleyways and hole-in-the-wall ramen shops, mixed with sprawling parks and trails to give it a naturally wondrous atmosphere. It was a small area within our mission, but densely packed. You could get lost in that place. And that was the situation we found ourselves the day we met her. I was on splits with another companion that day. Basically, splits is when you swap partners for a day with another pair of missionaries. My partner that day was an enemy of mine in the early days of my mission, but we had resolved our differences and become almost friends when we set out for splits. Looking forward to the change of pace that splits could provide, we decided to do something a little different than our normal preaching. On that day, we decided we would try to find an inactive member of the Kichioi congregation, someone who had been coming to church steadily for a while, but then fell away for one reason or another. All we had on the person we were trying to find was a name and an address. The address was located in a town a few stops down from us on a weird, smaller train line that we almost never used. Once we arrived at our stop, immediately the vibes in that region were off. The normally bright and busy atmosphere of the district had fallen away and given rise to empty streets and run-down buildings. Nevertheless, we pushed on. As you may expect of two foreigners, though wandering through a dense city, we almost immediately became lost. A few strange occurrences happened to us as we tried to right our bearings that I won't go into too much detail about, but I will list off just to give a vibe of what this area was like. First, we talked to a lady from Turkey that owned a small cafe and claimed that her brother had run off back to Turkey to settle a blood feud and never returned. She also believed that a giant celestial peacock rules the world and will one day kill all the unbelievers. Second, we were startled when a man in full surgery gear ran out screaming into the streets covered in blood from what I believe was some sort of veterinary office. Upon seeing us, though, he stopped, immediately composed himself, turned around back into the building. Finally, we stopped a somewhat normal dude who offered to show us the way to the building we were looking for. I say somewhat normal because I swear the dude was Batman. When we finally arrived at the place and turned to thank him for showing us the way there, he had vanished. Full-on Batman-style vanish. I don't know, he probably just walked around a corner super fast or something. But he was so quiet and quick, it was weird. So, with the aid of Batman, we finally arrived at our destination, which was 5 concrete apartment buildings covered in ivy and moss with a rusted chain-link fence around it. The place looked straight out of The Walking Dead, and my partner and I were somewhat surprised by the state of the place, even for the general disrepair of the area. As soon as we walked into the first hallway, though, we realized we had probably come all that way for nothing. The light in the hallways of the building were out, so the only light coming through was from the moss-covered glass that lined one side of the hallway on each floor. Each door in the hallway of the building had a small window to the left of it, and our hearts began to sink as we walked past the first few. Through the windows, we could see that the floorboards and the walls in almost every room had been ripped out, and a thick patch of black mold clung to everything within the building's interior. And at that point we realized the place was probably condemned. We headed back down the stairs at the other end of the building, and as we were descending, we started to hear faint sounds of classical or instrumental music. We both looked at each other, neither of us having any idea what the source was. We descended further, and as we reached the bottom, we found the source of the music. The window of the last room at the end of our side of the hallway was open, and a light was on inside. We approached, and to reiterate, we hadn't seen a single soul in this entire building up to that point, but we were about to meet the building's only resident, and nothing could have prepared us for what we saw next. As we looked through the window, we got a solid view of the kitchen, and everything was pink. I'm talking hot pink, Barbie pink, neon flamingo pink. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, the cabinets, the countertops, all pink. There was a small radio playing in the windowsill, the source of the music. There was one thing that stood out from all that pink, however. A gray metal pole with some tape wrapped on it in various places stood from ceiling to floor in the middle of the room, and a small pink stool sat beside it. The room was spotless, not a speck of dirt or mold anywhere, despite the next room down from that one being destroyed like all the rest. At the far end of the kitchen were some sliding paper doors that gave a peek into a tatami room, basically a Japanese-style bedroom. In the tatami room, all we could see were some large stuffed animals piled up. My companion and I looked warily at each other and briefly discussed what a truly strange room that was. Then we called out a hello in Japanese through the window. A few moments went by, and an answer returned in what sounded like a child's voice, but the words were completely indecipherable and mumbled coming from the other room. We called out again saying, "We're looking for someone we think used to live here. Do you know if there is another building everyone was moved into?" Now, what we saw next is a bit hard to fully describe, and I want to be respectful as I believe that the person we met was incredibly disabled. Nonetheless, they were very unnerving to meet. Crawling out from behind the paper doors in a sort of crab walk fashion, we saw an elderly lady with incredibly thin arms and legs, a spherical body, and dressed in an oversized t-shirt or nightgown of some sort. Her eyes were slightly bulging from her face and pointed off in opposite directions. There was something almost spider-like in the way she moved, and me and my companion were completely flabbergasted. She was speaking the whole time as she approached the pole in the middle of the room, though we were only understanding about every other word as she had a very mumbled way of speaking. Her speech style was the type a child might use, giving a further unsettling tone to this encounter. Once she reached the pole in the middle of the room, she propped herself first onto the stool and then began to climb her way up the pole. I have no idea why or how she did that. I mean, her arms and legs looked so thin, almost just like skin over bone. Yet somehow she lifted herself several feet up the pole and then wrapped herself around it. We were so shocked that I don't think we even said anything for like half a minute. We just stood there and might have let out a few nervous chuckles. Once we regained our composure, we asked our question again if she knew if everyone had been moved to another building. She spoke, but it was difficult to understand, even with over a year of experience speaking to random people every day in Japanese. This is basically what me and my companion were able to put together as we spoke with her. Everyone gone, everyone sick. Something else about mold, and that she was the only one left. We wrapped up our conversation pretty quickly after that. I'm a bit embarrassed to say, but we were both pretty put off by the sight of a tiny, elderly Japanese lady wrapped around a pole in a hot pink room. We left the building at a pace just shy of a jog, and she was still speaking in a tangent when we left. We discussed it with our normal companions that night, and they didn't believe us, and I don't blame them. I don't think I would have believed me either. My companion was persistent, however, about wanting to see the pink room, so we planned to go walk by the building just to walk by and see the room the day after the next. This next part of the story is the only part that I'm not really sure how to explain. I took my normal companion with me to the place, and I retraced our steps through the neighborhood. We passed the cafe, the vet's office, and finally arrived at the apartments. And I know for a fact it was them because they were very different compared to the rest of the area. It was the same moss and vines, same rusted chain-link fence, same building with no working lights, same mold and ripped-out interiors, same kitchen windows to the left of the doors. I took him to the exact spot the pink room was 2 days prior, and it was ripped out and covered in mold like everything else. It didn't look like a demolition crew had come in. It looked like everything had been ripped up and rotting over, just like every other room, and every other trace of pink was now gone. Now, at that point, I was panicking. I took my companion up and down every floor in every building in that complex. There was nothing. It's as though the pink room never existed. I told my split companion about it when I got back, and he was super freaked out. He went looking himself, and he didn't find it either. I text him every couple of years to make sure I'm not going crazy, and all of that really did happen. And he always says how weird the whole experience was. Neither of us are sure what happened to the room, but we both know that it happened. Years later, looking back on it, I believe that the pink room lady was probably just an elderly disabled woman that had some relatives in the area to clean up and look after her. I feel somewhat ashamed of the fear I always felt towards her, as I'm sure she was probably also startled to see 2 foreigners standing in her kitchen window. The logical part of me knows that there must be an answer as to why the room wasn't there when we went back. I just haven't found that answer yet. This is by far the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life as of yet, and I reckon I'll be thinking about that pink room for the rest of my life. A Road I Knew Well Changed by Chunky Boy 98. So this is going to sound weird, and well, that's because it is. Apologies for my grammar and punctuation. English is my first language. I'm just shit at it. I'm sitting here now at the age of 34 thinking about this, and I'm getting goosebumps because it just makes no sense. I was about 13 and grew up in a small village surrounded by farmland, and there was this road that for whatever reason gave us a weird vibe. It was a one-way road, and it somewhat looked like a tunnel as you headed onto the road due to the trees creating an archway. It's important to note that it was wintertime, so it was dark in the afternoons. We would often dare each other to walk down it and see how far we could go, until eventually we had all gotten ourselves about halfway down that road and gotten ourselves familiar with our surroundings. We continued to play there over the next few days, and we took quite a liking to the spot. On one of the days, we noticed there was a really old rusty gate that was completely stuck in a load of overgrowth. The gate looked like it would close off the entire road, and we tried to pull it out and close it because, why not? We were kids. But anyway, we simply couldn't move it. Years and years of overgrowth had completely entangled it, and it was pretty much just consumed by nature. The next day we headed down the road for our usual exploration. But this is where it gets really weird, and right as I type this, again I'm getting goosebumps. The gate was now closed, and in good condition. The bushes weren't there. It was really weird. The gate opened and shut with no issues, and that really unsettled us, so we left. Now, on that particular day, one of our friends had not come with us, and so we told him about it. And he didn't believe us, so we said we would go there with them to show them. And this is pretty much what fucked me up. We got there, and everything was back to how it was. Rusty gate stuck in a bunch of overgrowth. And me and the guys that saw it freaked the fuck out and pretty much never went back. There's been a lot of crazy and spooky shit that's happened to me. But that gate shit was really, really weird, especially because it was a few of us that saw it, and there was no way a gate in a bush could just magically appear and then disappear. Suicide Collectors by Anonymous. It was the spring of 1992. I'd gotten very ill due to an undiagnosed depression, having dropped out of Brigham Young University the previous year and working in minimum wage jobs. My life was difficult. I was living in a cheap hotel in the Provo, Utah area, the Hotel Roberts. It was a single room on the 3rd floor with a sink, a small table, and a beat-up dresser. There was a common shower for each floor, and the hotel was a Spanish mission-style building that had once been an exclusive hotel in the early 20th century, but by that time was now neglected and home to a number living at the edge of Utah's society. I was in my room one night trying to get to sleep, which is a hard thing to do when your brain chemistry isn't quite right, when an odd thing happened. Halfway into another feverish evening, I heard a buzzing sound, then voices of 2 male individuals. I could point in the direction the voices were coming from, yet it wasn't auditory. It was as if I heard them with my mind and not my ears. One said to the other, "I've never seen anyone hang on so long." And the other voice said, "Yes." I may have dismissed my experience as some manifestation of my poor mental condition, if it weren't for what happened the next morning. It was a couple hours after sunrise when I heard, "This is the police! Open the door!" Then I heard the sound of the door of the room next to me being kicked in. There were no more loud noises, just the muffled sound of the police talking amongst themselves. A few hours later, I found out that the occupant of the room next to mine had committed suicide. It's been over 30 years since this happened, and all I can say is I sleep well, and I've got a good job as a software engineer in Boise, Idaho. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you like what you've heard and seen and you're catching this on YouTube, give the video a thumbs up. Leave a comment. I'd like to know what you thought of the stories, and if you're not a subscriber, hey, why not subscribe? Tell a friend about the channel. All that stuff does help out with the algorithms. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take a step further in supporting what I'm doing, find a link in the description to my Patreon page, and consider getting yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is in the description as well. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.